My name is Nikhil Mehta. With me is my friend Zach Siegel, a big college football fan, knows a lot of the prospects that are in this draft. Zach, why don't you tell the listeners where they can find your work?
Yeah, so great to be here. You can find what I do at the A to Z Poll podcast on YouTube and on TikTok. Post daily content. Right now, we're currently in the midst of going through all 136 FBS teams so that you're ready for the 2025 season. So that's something that sounds interesting to you, but you should pop on over and see what we're about.
And today, like I said, we're doing another mock draft duel. If you haven't joined us for one before, the concept is pretty simple. We're going to use mock draft simulator, in this case, the one from Pro Football Focus. Thank you, PFF. And we are going to run a mock draft simulation with the Ravens 11 picks. And Zach and I are going to take turns making picks, not making picks towards the same class, but we're each going to make the Ravens 11 picks. And I'm going to pick first in the first and fourth rounds, and then Zach's going to pick first in the second and third rounds, and we're going to alternate from there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can all see the simulator that we're using. Um, and here we go. I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And so, I have on my personal big board, I think about 22 to 24, I think true first round grades. And so I'm really hoping, obviously, that one of those players falls to the Ravens. But if not, they will have to make a decision on a guy who is kind of a borderline first and second round player, which is actually the position that we end up in right here. I believe that all of my true first round grades are taken in this mock draft in the first 26 picks. And this is kind of, I don't want to say nightmare scenario because I think the Ravens will do a good job of knowing that they'll be in this, they could be in this position. But this is really not the ideal scenario for the Ravens where one of those clear top 20 players falls to them like has happened in previous drafts. So I'm gonna just take a look here at the board and scan it really quickly. Nick Scorton is a name that I really like, who I've gone with before. Derek Harmon. Donovan Jackson, I think it's interesting. He's consistently listed as a tackle when he played tackle this season. So I think with my first pick, I'm going to do what I think the Ravens end up doing in the first round here anyway, which is take James Pierce Jr. So I don't mean they're going to take James Pierce Jr. specifically. I think they're going to take an edge rusher. The way I have my board stacked, I just think that the crop of talent that's going to be available at the end of round one is going to be strongest in the edge group, and it's really going to thin out very, very quickly in this draft. I think it's a very top heavy edge draft. There aren't a lot of guys on day two that I'm particularly excited about. So I'm going to go ahead and go with James Pierce Jr. here, and kind of lock up that edge spot. Odafe Owe has been a pretty frequent comp for James Pierce Jr., but he's got the production, and so I think that that's going to help him contribute early on. Zach, what are you thinking for this pick?
I love that James Pierce Jr. I love him here. Honestly, the biggest concern that I think a lot of people have with him and why he's even falling this far is his size generally and the style of play that he has. He plays very rigid. He plays very put his head into you and push. And while that doesn't always translate to the NFL all that well, I think James Pierce Jr. is such like a unique talent in the way he leverages his body and the way he operates as a football player that those are things I think I'm willing to overlook. Especially at this point in the draft, like being a late first round pick, where I just think that James Pierce Jr. would make the biggest impact on my team. I often find myself going back and forth between safety slash cornerback and edge rusher at this point in the draft, and I think with this draft class having so much depth in it outside of the first round, that going with edge here, I agree with you. It does really thin out after this first crop of edge rushers.
Yeah, Pierce has those like ambiguous, character concerns. People are worried about, the motivation and the want to. And so, as someone who doesn't obviously, doesn't get a chance, isn't privy to all that information. I kind of have to go with what I'm based on. I think that's a big question mark I would have about him. And so I'm kind of making that pick with the caveat that I at least have some answers to those questions that I'm okay with. But, in real life, that could be a serious thing that the Ravens are like, look, this is we're not convinced that he loves this. Now, again, he's young, he's 21. That's something the Ravens like at the end of the first round. And I think that, he'll be in a position in Baltimore with Chuck Smith and a solid edge group where he'll really get to do what he loves, which is chase the passer early on in his career. What's going to be your pick here?
Here, I've traditionally also gone with an edge rusher, and I have very much like Donovan Uruziaku. Um, he's been somebody who I think has fallen a little bit recently into more of a mid second round pick, but he might have already been taken
Yeah, I think he
actually.
already got taken by the he got taken by the Bengals.
Okay, well he's been somebody who I've fallen in love with a lot recently. I think his I think one of the crazy things about him is so he also is technically underweight. I know there's that rule about 250-pound
Mhm.
edges, and he weighed in at 248 at the combine. So he technically falls as an exception to that rule, but his proportions are pretty crazy. He's 6'2" with a 6'9" wingspan, and was an absolute monster in the ACC last year at Boston College. So I think that he was the one who I liked a lot here. And I think if you asked me, a month ago, it really just seems like James Pierce Jr. and Donovan Uruziaku have just kind of switched places in a lot of people's
Mhm.
big boards. Um, but of the available talent right now, here, scroll down slightly. Let's see. I like Kevin Winston. Um, Nick Scorton wouldn't be a terrible pick here either. But actually, you know who caught my eye earlier today was Xavier Watts. I think Xavier
Love that
Watts,
pick.
he plays such an instinctual style of football in the way that he just knows where to be at the right times. He led all of FBS in interceptions 2 years ago, and I think that he plays like I know the easy comparison is Kyle Hamilton, but they do play a very similar style of football. I mean, obviously the only difference is Xavier Watts, if he was a little bigger, if he was Kyle Hamilton's size, would also probably have been a top 10 to 15 pick, just like Hamilton was.
Yeah, I think Watts is a guy who I think obviously earlier in the draft process, I really was hoping the Ravens could land him with their second pick. At this point, I think Starks and Aman Warrior are probably the first two safeties off the board, and Watts is probably Watts or Winston are third after that. Um, Watts, I really like. I think he'd be really good as kind of a deep safety that'll enables Kyle Hamilton to go play underneath. He's not a guy that I see super versatile in terms of playing down in the slot or in the box, and I think that's the only reason why I'd hesitate to take him in the first round. But this is kind of the position the Ravens might be in, where they really have to go with what they're scouting and what their positional fit. Their schematic fit and their defense is. And I think Watts would just give them a lot of options in terms of playing both as a single high and as a split field safety. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to keep track of my picks in PFF Simulator, and I'll keep track of both of our picks on paper here. So I'm going to add James Pierce Jr. to my draft class. I think one of the other things about, kind of not getting edge out of the way, but using your first pick on an edge is just also the number of edges drafted outside of the first round or really the first 50 or so picks that produce a lot is pretty low. It's not a great hit rate. And I'm not certain that there's even going to be an edge I love here available at 59. And now let me know, Zach, where you want me to go and what positions you want to look at with this pick here.
So we already did get our edge out of the way. Um, at this point, it might be a time that we can look at um, maybe that we can attack that safety position with a Kevin Winston pick. Here, scroll down just a little bit. Uh, I think it's a little too high to go for someone like Jalen Royals, who I loved watching in college, but I just don't know if that's a need for the Ravens right now. Same with like a Trey Harris, someone who I really like. But right there, Indiana, CJ West.
I
I,
love CJ West. I think he was my second round pick in a recent draft as well.
he is somebody who played very, very intense football last year, and even when he was at uh even when he was at Kent State, he still found himself just mauling over the best competition he could find. I think I'm going to go with CJ West here. I know we're kind of leaning very D heavy right now, but that's definitely something I can see the Ravens doing at this point.
Yeah, given the makeup of the board, it would surprise. I think I could see the Ravens going with defensive players in two of their first three picks, and it certainly could be the first two picks. Now with edge taken care of, I'm not quite as high on Kevin Winston because I think he's more of the hybrid safety and not the deep coverage guy that the Ravens need. I think there's There is a premium placed on versatility in the NFL, but I also think it's very clear the Ravens for a long time have needed a reliable deep safety. Geno Stone was able to fill that role for a little while, but Earl Thomas, Marcus Williams, Eddie Jackson, these guys just never worked out. Ardarius Washington's going to be on the team at least next year, but we don't know what his long-term future is, and that's I'd love to get a long-term running mate for Kyle Hamilton out of this draft. I think I am going to kind of do something similar to what you did. I think I'm going to look at the offense. I think I'm going to look at offensive line and defensive line here. Omar Norman Lott is a name that I've heard associated with the Ravens. I'm not as super high on him as some others are. Certainly not as high on him as PFF is. I think I'm more a fan of, like you mentioned, CJ West is a guy that I would really love to target with the second round pick. So I think what I'm going to do instead is go look at the offensive line because I think this is the other area I'd love to see the Ravens use a premium pick on. I think, the offensive line is fundamental to any offense in the NFL. With Lamar Jackson, historically, he has been at his best, not necessarily when he's had a elite set of weapons. He's done very well, but I think he's been at his best when he's been comfortable in the pocket. And so there are a couple guys here I like between Marcus and Bo, who I believe I drafted in a previous draft. So I'm going to try and avoid those repeats here. Ozzy Trapilo, I think the name that I was really looking for, Ariante Arsary, is a name that I love for the Ravens. He is like one of my favorite players that they could go after. I think he's a perfect fit for what they want to do. Trapilo is similar in terms of he has the really big size, but I do think he's a right tackle only as a starter. I'm not sure I see him as a long-term Ronnie Stanley replacement. I guess it's not clear that he's a long-term Ronnie Stanley replacement. But I'm gonna go ahead and take him with the second round pick here. I think that he's a guy who, he spent time at guard. The Ravens have no problem playing a high guard. So I could see him potentially competing for a starting spot as a rookie, maybe at guard. But I think in the long term, I'm looking for a guy who can maybe play left tackle in the long term after Ronnie Stanley eventually retires. So I'm going to take Azu Trapilo here. I think that that's a pick where I would really love to get Ursary. I think he's the guy I much prefer in that situation. But I also think kind of like Edge, the offensive tackle, was really going to thin out after the top 70 picks or so. So I think it's incumbent on the Ravens to go ahead and get one there. Zach, your first pick again here. Let me know where you want me to go look.
All right. So when you mentioned offensive line initially, Tate Ratledge is somebody who came to mind, but also so did Wyatt Millum. He's a guy who played at West Virginia, so that might alter my perception slightly, but I like my West Virginia guys, but he was a very very consistent player for the Mountaineers. For 4 years, he started in Morgantown and also played with multiple quarterbacks that were primarily rushers there, which I think is important, obviously, for Baltimore and our style of offense. Um, where he was the offensive tackle for the best rushing attack in college football 2 years ago, and as far as total yards. Um, so that's somebody who I definitely like here. And so, sorry, Nikhil, let me ask a clarifying question. Am I drafting? I have my own draft that you're covering, right? So I'm not worried about who you just drafted last.
You're not worried about who I just drafted last, but you can't. Anyone who I already took is obviously gone.
Right. All right. So, oh shoot. Sorry. I see
Millum went to the
Yeah,
Packers a
Wyatt
couple picks
Millum went
before.
there
We're
before
we're
picking
getting a
up.
little stymied here. I can go ahead and look at what other tackles are available. Cameron Williams is another name I like. He would definitely be if you can't land an offensive lineman in your second pick, he would be a guy I would really look at hard. One of these three guys at the end of the third round for the Ravens to draft and try and develop them long term.
Uh, go to go to safeties for me real quick.
Safeties.
Has Kobe Bryant been taken yet?
Um,
It looks like
is
it.
he listed as a safety or a corner?
He might be listed as a corner.
Let me see. Nope, Kobe Bryant's still there.
He's somebody who 2 years ago. was looking at people thinking, okay, he's going to be a first round draft pick next year. Once he grows into himself, he'll be even better. And he's still really young. He's still only 21 years old. And while he did make a little bit of a leap, he did not make quite the leap that I think a lot of people thought he was going to make coming into this upcoming season. I'm sorry, this past season. But I think that that was more of a result of Kansas kind of falling apart as a program last year, uh, other than not necessarily Kobe Bryant not being able to make the stride. So I think that's what I'm going to go with in this pick. Kobe Bryant, he's a player who has all the physical attributes I think you would want in somebody right there, and that I think is probably just getting a little bit looked over because of not meeting these expectations that people put out for him this last year. But I think at the 91st pick, you're going to get great value for a player who has all the potential in the world.
Yeah, I like that pick. I think, drafting a long-term cornerback too is definitely something on the Ravens' radar. I'm very much torn here between going with a defensive lineman, an interior defensive lineman, which is a huge, huge need for the Ravens, or going with a safety in Andrew Mukuba, who I just think he is fantastic. He fits exactly what this team is looking for. But I really want to keep an eye on this defensive line group because there's a potential for it to really thin out before the Ravens get another pick in 30 picks. And so this is a little bit of a risk here. There are some guys that I'm interested in, but I think I'm really going to prioritize getting Mukubu, who is a player I really have kind of earmarked for the Ravens. I think ideally the Ravens are in a situation where they can get Starks or Xavier Watts with one of their first two picks. But if not, Makuba to me is very easy to pencil in as a third rounder if obviously he falls that far. So moving on to the fourth round, I've got an edge rusher, an offensive tackle, and a safety. You've got a safety, a defensive lineman, and a cornerback. So diverging a little bit, but I think we're kind of thinking about some of the same things in how we're building this team. Now, to me, I think the other thing about Trapilo, I think that the Ravens will appreciate, similar to Zay Flowers, that he chose to stay at Boston College in the long term. He had options to transfer out, and that may have limited his development in some ways in terms of the coaching and competition. But he's a guy whose frame. And particularly like pretty good technique for a guy who doesn't seem to be the most developed yet. So I have the first pick here in the fourth round. I am going to go and this is kind of what I was worried about was that the defensive linemen were just going to get taken and taken and taken very quickly, and now you're kind of faced with having to um, you know I personally I don't think Ty Robinson, for example, would be a reach here. I'm a huge, huge fan of his. I think that he's a player that really would fit what the Ravens want to do, but I also think that he is a little undersized. If I remember correctly, I believe he is just a touch undersized and wouldn't really profile as the true nose that they kind of need to look for in this draft. And I believe I've also taken Ty Robinson in a previous mock draft duel. So instead, I'm going to go with the guy right below him, Cameron Jackson. This might be a reach compared to consensus. He's not, a pass rusher, but I think starting on day 4, if you can get a guy who is going to play as a rookie, as a nose tackle, that's a pretty good value toward the end of the fourth round. So I think Cameron Jackson is going to be my pick here. There are some other players I will say that I considered that are kind of at the top of the PFF board. Both Isaac Tesla and Kyle Williams are guys who I'd love to maybe fall to the Ravens. But I do think that, they need to prioritize adding more to the defensive line here and taking a really strong run defender here early on day 3 gives them the flexibility to look later on day 3 for someone with more of a pass rushing profile.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, so Florida last year was a very up and down program, and I think one of the things that was keeping them grounded a little bit and kept them in some of these games, like the Georgia game, and when they could actually, do something on offense, was that pass rush that was really able to disrupt a lot of quarterbacks, and I think that he was a huge part of it. I definitely think, at least for my draft right now, I'm definitely lacking a little bit of that pass rush. Um, that being said, there is one guy who's been going around this time that I have been a pretty big fan of. Is Jack Kaiser been taken yet?
Linebacker Jack Kaiser. Let's see. No,
Linebacker
he
Jack
is close to
Kaiser.
the top of the board at linebacker.
No, so recently I've been going really back and forth between Kobe King and Jack Kaiser. Actually, the two top people obviously on the list. And I think that what Baltimore was looking for, in Trenton Simpson this last year, we didn't really get. I don't think he stepped up in the role that I think a lot of people were expecting him to. Um, so it wouldn't surprise me if he went for one of these mid-round linebackers like Jack Kaiser and Kobe King. A couple weeks ago, I saw a Jack Kaiser play that absolutely changed my perspective on him, where they were having him rush a lot. They were having him uh, attack the line, and he got chop blocked, proceeded to then jump on all fours and run multiple steps on all fours to sack the quarterback. Probably the coolest play by a linebacker that I've seen in maybe all year. Um, so somebody that I think will probably projects more as a an inside linebacker, but absolutely has that capability to rush the passer and be and kind of cause havoc everywhere. I'm gonna say my pick here is going to be my second Notre Dame player in Jack Kaiser.
All right, Jack Kaiser over to Zach. I'm gonna go ahead and put Cameron Jackson into my draft here. And yeah, now I feel like, edge, tackle, safety, defensive interior. I think that's, O-line, maybe not necessarily tackle, but I think that's how ideally I would want the Ravens to use these first four picks. I think those are their clearest, long-term needs, after this season. Fifth round, or sorry, fifth pick, fourth round compensatory pick. Zach, you have the first pick here.
All right. Going into this pick here. Scroll down slightly. Let's see what we're working with down here. So we still got Ty Robinson going around. We still got, there we go. We're gonna go with our first offensive pick in a big body wide receiver, Ty Felton.
All right,
He
go with
is
Ty
somebody who,
Felton.
yep, Ty Felton. Somebody who I think is getting very not getting very much attention because of where he played uh, football in Maryland, a team that did not play very well last year, a team that was just bad. So but that being said, Ty Felton, I believe, did lead the Big Ten in receiving yards
He
last
did.
year. He And you would think that the guy who had more yards than, Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and all those and Cordell Tate, everybody on Ohio State and then some, you would think he'd be a little higher. I think this is exactly what the Ravens need. Not even necessarily for him to start this year, but for him to sit behind maybe a DeAndre Hopkins and learn from him, as kind of that big go get him wide receiver. I think he could be somebody who really helps us down the long run. And in the short term, another really big body to go gun down on kickoffs and such.
Yeah, he's long. He's kind of is not super big, and so I think he'll need to work on bulking up a little bit and playing through contact. Can play on the outside or in the slot. Did really well in the slot in 2024. A returner, which is key. Jack Kaiser again. I think targeting a linebacker on day three is something the Rays do. I'd love to see them go with a guy that has, like you said, a little bit more of a pass defense profile. I feel very free in what I can go do with this pick, and so I'm going to go look kind of around here. A number of players that I like, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Rocket Raheem Sanders. There are a number of running backs that I like in this region. I'm going to go ahead and go look at the offensive line because I wouldn't be against adding multiple players to this offensive line. Defensive interior. Again, I think this is ripe for a double dip. I'm not sure any of these players are quite who I'd be targeting late in the fourth round. I also want to go check at corner. And there are a number of players, here at cornerback that I think the Ravens have a history of trying to draft and develop cornerbacks on day three. Um, and again, none of these names at this point on day three are really gonna jump off the page. And so I think it's a lot very dependent on how you project these guys.
Uh,
Um, you know,
Speak for yourself, Nikhil. I'm having so much fun looking at these guys that not everyone knows about. Robert Longerbeam is a guy who I've targeted in previous drafts. He's a little bit fits that mold of kind of the undersized but very instinctual and tenacious cornerback that the Ravens have liked in a couple other drafts. But I actually think I'm going to copycat you a little bit here. I'm going to go over to linebacker and take Kobe King. Linebacker is kind of a sneaky need for the Ravens right now.
Trenton Simpson kind of lost that starting job over the course of the year, and the two guys that ended up replacing him are both now signed with other teams. And so he's a super downhill player. He is not really that technically good in coverage. I actually see him more as like a potential Malik Harrison replacement who can also play as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 on occasion, or even the Ravens sometimes will do a 4-3 look, and you need an outside linebacker like Kobe King there. So he's experienced. They really like guys out of that Penn State defense. I think he'll be a beast on special teams and will be able to help out early on rundowns early on. So I'm gonna go ahead and add Kobe King out of Penn State into my draft here. Um,
Yeah,
so
I said earlier I've been between Kobe King and Jack Kaiser, and most of my mock drafts I end up taking a linebacker around this time, and both of those guys I feel like sometimes I end up reaching for Jack Kaiser, sometimes Kobe King falls a little further than he needs to, but I do just love the physicality of Kobe King, and I feel like he kind of plays that like that Baltimore Ravens play style.
he does, and I think I think he has the uh, lateral movement maybe that he can help him in coverage, but he will be a target in coverage, as was obviously Malik Harrison during much of his tenure in Baltimore. And so I think that's something that he'll definitely need to keep an eye on and try and improve on here. I have the first pick here in the end of the fifth round, a compensatory pick in the fifth round. And I'm kind of torn if I do want to actually pull the trigger, go ahead and pull the trigger on a running back here, or if I want to add another offensive lineman. The offensive lineman in particular I'm thinking of is Dylan Fairchild. I think that whole Georgia offensive line, that interior trio, is really good. I think Fairchild's getting knocked for maybe a lack of elite upside, but I still think there is a lot there that you can do with. I think in if I hadn't taken Gordon in so many other mock drafts, I probably would take him here. But I think instead I'm going to go ahead and take Kyle how do you pronounce his
Manangai,
name, Zach? Say it.
Manangai.
Manangai, out of Rutgers. I think it's my friend Garrett Ferguson had said this on Twitter recently that he is kind of a competitive running back that kind of fits that Raven style of mixing it up. Effective in chipping, pass blocking, a pretty good pass catcher, and this is really my priority with a running back in this year's draft class. I really like the depth of this year's running back class, particularly the number of guys that you can get on day three who have pass catching chops. And what I believe yes, it is great to have a runner like Derrick Henry in the Ravens offense when you can find an elite guy like that and take the rushing offense to the next level. But I also think what Lamar Jackson does is enables you to go after a running back that may not have the best, physical upside, but is a guy that you trust in your scheme and that you trust in the passing game. And that's something that we just haven't seen that much out of. Other than really from Justice Hill out of the running backs in Lamar Jackson's tenure is pass catching chops. So I think that's why I'm going to go with him here.
So I've been going back and forth on Kai Managa for a while now because there's really a couple things I think to look at. One, love the way the guy runs. Hates the ground. That's how he runs. He stomps into the ground. He puts his head into you. He is going to get yards where they don't exist. The problem is also that exact same style of play and that he's already, I believe, 24.
He
He's a
is.
little bit older.
No, he's about to turn 23.
He's only about to turn 23 because he
Mhm.
played for a fifth year, I thought, at Rutgers.
He's a 3-year starter at Rutgers. I think he did play for 5 years. He must have
Okay.
just gone to college when he was a 17-year-old.
Okay. Well, maybe he's not as old as I thought he was, but that was honestly my biggest concern is the way he plays, I love, but it also is, who knows how that's going to work out when you're running into NFL linebackers and not college linebackers. All right, that being said, it's my pick, right?
Yep.
I haven't really gone for the pass rush since CJ West, so you want to go look over at the edges for me real quick. Is Quay Robinson still there? Or is he long gone?
No, he's gone.
He's long gone. All right. I still may look in there. I do like Jaw Joyner. Ethan Downs had a pretty good season last year. Um, who else am I looking at? Go to Go to wide receivers for me. I know I already took one, but there's one guy that I'm looking at in particular right now. Um, is it too soon to take Ricky White?
I don't think it is. I might take him a little bit later,
Mm,
just given the glut of picks at the end of the sixth round that the Ravens have.
yeah. Yeah, all right. I'll save my Ricky White pick for a little later. Um, but I think I've convinced myself of Ja Joyner. I think I'm gonna go with Ja Joyner here. I like his upside. I think he was a corner piece of a very underrated Minnesota defense last year that really had to deal with a lot of adversity throughout the whole year. Uh, he's somebody who I think will be very malleable in our system. I think that's one of the best things you can look for at this point in the draft. Do I think he's going to be somebody who comes in and immediately is playing, 50 plus snaps for us a game? Absolutely not. We're getting him in the fifth round, but I do think that he is somebody who we can build upon very well.
Yeah, he's got the tools. He's got the tools, I think, to be a good to be a good edge rusher in the NFL, and he's coming in the right place to develop them with Chuck Smith. Um, I like the way that he fits in this edge room. You know, this is my one thing about using a first round pick on James Pierce Jr. is that is going to put Adisa Isaac, David Ojabo, Tavius Robinson has carved out his own role, I would say. But in terms of just having guys pin their ears back and go at the rusher, it's going to push those guys down the depth chart. And now I'm not against doing that for adding the right talent level, absolutely, in terms of James Pierce Jr. But what I really like about this pick with Ja Joyner is he's not a guy who is, kind of pushing Jabo and Isaac down the depth chart. I don't know what we're going to get out of Jabo. I think it's way too early to call it on Isaac. I think it's fair to not expect anything out of Jabo, but Isaac had the classic stunted rookie year with injuries and whatnot. That that on top of all of the acclamation, the NFL has a tendency to really limit guys that have those uncertain first off seasons. And so, I think I'm expecting bigger things out of Isaac this year. And one of the nice things about a player like Joyner is that, he is going to come in underneath Isaac on the depth chart and give him a chance to develop and get more competitive reps in live games. I mean, that's something that players say is just like iron sharpen iron. Getting reps in live regular season games helps these young guys get better. And I'd love to see that for Isaac early in the season. Investing too heavily in edge could kind of box him out of the room. So I like that pick here. I'm considering a couple things. One is going to look for an interior rusher. Robinson and Hemingway are two names that I have seized on in past drafts. Like I said, I don't want to do any repeats here, so I'm going to try and avoid that. Having taken a running back, I might again go look at offensive linemen. Like I said, Dylan Fairchild is still here. That could be honestly a pretty easy pick for me to just go ahead and add a guy who may not have the highest upside at guard. He may not ever be an elite guard in the NFL, but I think, again, this is day three. You're looking at the, back of the seventh, the back of the the very end of the fifth round here. He's got that wrestling mentality, that wrestling background that the Ravens love. He is a purely interior guy, and I don't know if he has any experience as a center. I think he's only played guard in college. Was on the freaks list, Bruce Feldstein's freak list, which I think is a big plus. And that Georgia scheme was very diverse. I think one of the things that some of the guards in this class is that they really project as zone only guys. And Fairchild was both on, played a lot of zone, a lot of gap in that scheme. So I'm going to go ahead and add Dylan Fairchild here with this fifth round compensatory pick.
I like that pick, and I like what you said a little earlier about how just Georgia, their whole offensive line is, NFL ready almost. Like that's a unit that was almost unbreakable last year.
Did I mix up the order there? You took Ja Joyner, and then did you take anybody after Joyner?
Um, no, no, no.
No, okay. I think I
Just
actually
took I
skipped you,
just
so I'm
took
going to give you two
Joyner.
picks in a row right here. So you go ahead.
Okay, well, wait, I just picked Joyner, didn't I? Right
Yeah, but
here.
that was the fourth round pick.
Oh,
That
that was
was
the fourth
the
round pick.
second fourth rounder. Yeah,
Okay. Um,
I
is,
believe. Let me double check here. No, I'm sorry. Let me add. Sorry, just got to skip ahead here. So
okay.
you took Joyner with this 176th pick. I
Okay.
skipped ahead and took Fairchild, who thankfully did not go in between these two picks.
Okay. So now is it my turn
Yeah.
to pick? All right. So I imagine okay, I still think it's probably a little early for Ricky White, even though still very high on him. Um, how about Upton Stout, cornerback from Western Kentucky?
Upton Stout, he may have already been taken here.
He might have. He's been
Yep.
flying up.
Probably gone already.
He's been flying up boards. He was someone I was hoping would fall this low. Um, all right, you know what? I might follow your lead with this whole running back thing. Let me because seeing all those names, there's some fun names on that list, even probably now. I mean, Taj Brooks has been real good. Ollie Gordon, I mean, what he did 2 years ago, we were expecting him to be a first round pick. And Woody Marks over there, Joquavius, or he goes by Woody Marks. He's also somebody who had some crazy good year last year, and was even better on Mississippi State the year before. Um, Jordan James is kind of reminds me of a Justice Hill type in terms of really fast guy out of the backfield. Isn't really gonna, not like a ground and pound type running back, but he is definitely very shifty. Um, I think I want to go with Ollie Gordon here.
All
Um,
right.
I know he kind of had a little bit of a down year comparatively. I mean, a little bit. He had a down year compared to what he did the year before, but what he did the year before was one of the best running back seasons we've seen in a very long time. Um, I love his upside. I love what he can do. I and his pass catching ability out of the backfield as well makes him, in my opinion, very, very good pick for where we are right now.
All right, so I'm gonna put Ollie Gordon down for you. I took, like I was saying, my pick with this pick, the sixth round pick the Ravens have traded with the Panthers is going to be Dylan Fairchild, who I just talked to. So I'm going to take that pick. And since I skipped you on the last one by accident, Zach, I'm going to have you go first once again here.
Alrighty.
This is kind of the thing about them being really late in the draft. It's entirely possible there are names called by the Ravens that we don't know that are like some small school guy that they really seized on or something like that this late in the draft.
I feel like we're at this point, we're getting some pretty good um we're getting some good value for Ty Robinson. Uh that being said, there is another defensive lineman that I think we might be able to get a little bit later. Look up Ahmad Hassanian if you can.
Edge out of Boise State, I believe he got
He did
taken.
get taken.
Yeah.
Darn. All right, then. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with Ty Robinson.
All right. I like that pick. He's a guy who I've really wanted on this team for a while as the kind of the second O-line pick in this draft. Just really, really solid player who I think will offer some pass rushing upside on day three. Um, I'm gonna take a look here. I haven't addressed cornerback, and I would like to double dip at defensive interior. There are a couple other things I'd like to that I'm kind of thinking about here. Um, I
I know
think
it's your pick, but Howard Cross, he really showed up in the biggest moments last year, and I think that shouldn't go unrecognized, especially with the way that the Ravens have ended their seasons the last couple of years.
Yeah, Howard Cross is actually another player I like. I'm a little I can't really pinpoint what it was that made him fall off in the that made him fall off in 2024 compared to 2023, just had a much stronger season. But I worry about the frame. He's 6'1", 283. He's kind of a tweener. He's a guy who I really worry about finding a role in the NFL, but I really like that pass rushing upside, the work ethic. He has a lot of the things I'm looking for. It's just I'm concerned about how that frame is going to translate into the NFL at 6'1" and 283 and exactly what role he's going to play. So he's a guy I might take a little bit later than this. He's a guy I was thinking about trying to take with one of the last one of the last two picks, maybe even the last pick if he falls that far. So instead, I think I'm going to go look either, I've got two linemen. I feel pretty solid about that. A name I like here is Orandi Gadsden. Now, the tight end thing is tough because as of right now, there's just no room for another tight end on this roster. It's entirely possible the Ravens find a way to move one of their three tight ends in a contract year, Andrews likely or Kolar, and make room for a guy like Gadsden on this roster. But in lieu of that, I think instead I'm going to go out to corner here, and I'm kind of torn between a couple guys, particularly Justin Wally and Jason Marshall Jr. Wally. I think to me is a guy who ends up in the slot in the NFL, but he played primarily on the outside at Minnesota, and so I believe, and so I think that's something that he is going to have to like learn a little bit to be able to find his home in the NFL. Whereas, Jason Marshall Jr. is, I think, slightly more prototypical for the outside, a little bit bigger, a little bit longer. He just needs to develop. He has the size, he has the athleticism. He really just needs to develop mentally as a cornerback. And thinking about what the Ravens need in the long term, right? They have Nate Wiggins very clearly as a long term cornerback. I would be surprised if they moved on from Marlon Humphrey anytime soon. Um, and so, do you want a guy who might be a little bit flexible playing inside or outside? I'm not sure I see Jason Marshall Jr. having the upside of a long-term number two, but I could see Justin Wally being, having a role as a slot defender and dime defender in a defense. So I'm going to go ahead with Justin Wally out of Minnesota. Um, Grab him here. I guess he's a recent addition to the PFF simulator. I'm not sure. And then this is obviously where the crop is 203, 210, and 212, where, the Ravens just have a ton of options. I think receiver is a place that I would go ahead and look here. Unfortunately, it looks like your guy is off the board. Ricky White just got taken by the Broncos before. It is still a fairly
Devastating.
strong. There are a number of guys I like down here. Jimmy Horn Jr. is a guy who just kind of has the
Mhm.
feel of getting open. He's just not an elite athlete. Again, you're looking here on day three. I think the thing I'm really looking for at this point is returning upside as well. I'm not sure if Horn returned kicks in Colorado. I think he did return
He,
some kicks at Colorado.
they
Um,
didn't have like a main guy. Hunter even returned some kicks there. It was everybody.
which is cheating to have Hunter return kicks. That's just cheating to me. The other thing I would really consider is a double dip at safety and try and add another deep safety profile. I've targeted, I think those three for me here would be Craig Woodson, Malachi Moore, and Dan Jackson. I have targeted all three in other mock draft duels. So again, trying to stay away from the duplicates. I'm kind of torn here if I want to. Howard Cross is like to me a super late dart throw to go with. So I think instead I'm going to go with Jimmy Horn Jr. I know people are going to criticize going with a Colorado receiver and saying, oh well, oh it's just the Colorado boost. But honestly, Jimmy Horn Jr. is not getting a Colorado boost. He is very much being not. He's not being really talked about at all as a part of that Colorado offense. And he was injured for part of the year, and I think that's another instance of I would want to have that checked out if I was a team and make sure that I'm okay with whatever the state of that injury is. Um, but I think he's a guy that he can, quick hitters. He can play underneath. He can open up vertically. I don't think he has necessarily the size. He certainly does not have the size to punish vertically. He's 5'8". I think he's a returner, potential slot guy. But again, this is a sixth round comp pick we're talking about, and that's really not the worst value if you really think this guy can be a plus kick returner that the Ravens need. That Harbaugh has talked about getting that in this draft, and I'd be very surprised if they came out of this draft without that.
Yeah, I mean, I really do like Jimmy Horn. I think he was one of the better wide receivers in college football last year, and it actually did surprise me seeing him be this low. He would have been a number one wide receiver on multiple programs last year. So seeing him, seeing him this low is almost a little surprising, based off of what he was able to do last year.
Mm, agreed.
Um,
Let me know if there are any positions you want me to look at specifically.
yeah, so go back to corner real quick. There's someone who caught my eye there last time. Or if he's still there. He is Za Frazier. He is somebody who has some pretty like impressive physical attributes as far as his makeup speed and his kind of versatility at the cornerback position that I think we could really use right now in with the Ravens. Like I think he's kind of I'll use that term you did earlier, like a little bit of a tweener as far as like, he's not doesn't have necessarily the game-breaking speed that's gonna, be able to like a Nate Wiggins, but he still ran a 4.36 and is absolutely going to be one of the fastest people on the field at all times. I think he, for the value of, being this late in the draft, would be I would love to take him here, and I'd be very happy if the Ravens were able to get away with that.
All right, I'll put Za Frazier on your board here. I'm gonna go ahead and add Jimmy Horn to mine. Knocks out that receiver or that wide receiver six and returner role that they have. Again on the clock here at 2:12. I believe it's your first pick this time.
All right. I was really disappointed that Ricky Williams got taken. He was so obviously I would talk about him for a few different rounds. It wasn't really just his 200 or 2,500 receiving yards and almost 20 touchdowns he had over the last 2 years, but it was the fact that he had four blocked punts that last year that I really thought Ricky Williams at the very least could be used as an aggressively good special teams player this year. But I'm going to go with probably a lesser known guy right now in Efton Chisholm, the wide receiver from East Washington. Last year, I football was just about over for the day, and I flipped on a random Idaho State versus Eastern Washington game and got to see Efton Chisholm go for a buck 50 and a touchdown. I think he's a player who clearly looked better than the competition around him, and I think would fit in well in a place like Baltimore, where he's not necessarily going to be expected to be that guy because we have almost like a wide receiver by committee after Zay.
Yeah, my only concern is just his combine numbers, especially that 40 at 4.71 was just really slow for a guy who's 5'11 and 193. And I don't know what I think that's something where I'd go look at what his game tape looks like and see how much that shows up there and see what tracking data teams have. For my pick, I've added the receiver, I've added the cornerback. It is really best player. It is really best player available season. And I think it is really time to go ahead and double dip at interior. I'm kind of between. I don't know. I think if Howard Cross was available at 243, I think that's probably where I'd take him just to secure a player that I think would otherwise be a priority free agent if he did fall all the way out of the draft. But instead, I think I'm going to take Jared Harrison Hunt out of SMU because he does have that explosive pass rushing potential. Now, again, that's potential. He had a solid year at SMU this year. I believe he had 6.5 sacks at SMU this year. And he has like that slightly slimmer interior pass rusher body. But I he doesn't worry me as a tweener as much as Howard Cross does. And so I think if the Ravens take a nose as they're I'm expecting them to at some point in this draft, I don't want them to take two noses. Like I like Nazir Stackhouse out of Georgia, but he's a nose, and I don't see either him nor Cameron Jackson being positionally versatile across the line. I think Hunt is probably going to be able to line up in that 3 to 5 tech that the Ravens also need depth at that spot. So I'm going to go ahead and go with Jared Harrison Hunt here. And Zach, who was your last pick just now, by the way? I forgot to write it down.
Efton Chisholm.
Afton Chisholm. All right. And I'm gonna go ahead and add Jared Harrison Hunt to my board here. And now we go to 243, and I think this is a really fun pick to have just as a general manager because it's almost like you just get the first pick of whoever's going to go undrafted, basically. I think that's what these last several picks are about are, which of the players that are available right now do you think are either going to go before this draft ends or do you want to ensure that you have a chance at them because you're not sure that they're going to sign with you as an undrafted free agent? That's kind of
Mhm.
what my perspective is. One name I like here, Smile Mondon Jr. I believe he visited the Ravens, as a developmental linebacker, and I think he'd be a beast on special teams right away. But I'm gonna, I guess, challenge myself a little bit and look just a little bit further down the board and see what names pop up that I like. Another Colorado guy, Shiloh Sanders. Thor Griffith is another guy who I think is being slept on just a little bit in this draft. Um, Looking all the way down, there aren't, Jay Toa, again, I think would be a little bit more of a nose. Tommy Aking-Bisote, I think would be a good undrafted free agent for the Ravens to sign. Um, but really, with just a straight best player available approach here, um, there isn't really that need for a cornerback. But Tommy Millott, if I'm thinking of the right guy, which I think I am out of Montana State, is just an electric athlete. He's not a quarterback in the long term in the National Football League. But he is a guy who I think is probably going to go undrafted because it's not really clear what his position is in the long term. But I'm betting on athleticism at the very end of day three of the draft. And that's a guy that I would at least want to get in my offense and see what I could do with him as a ball carrier, as a gadget player, maybe a special teams guy. I'm not super familiar with him. I think most of what I've seen from him has been, the athletic ball carrying skills. But this late in the draft, it is very thin. And so the running back room is full. I do like Rocket Raheem Sanders. The running back room is full. Dan Jackson, Mondin, these are guys who I've targeted in other drafts who which again, I'm trying to avoid that here. And Reed and Hancock just don't profile as the kind of safety that I'm looking for. If the Ravens want safeties that can play the nickel, play the box, and play downhill in special teams. They have multiple guys who can do that already, and so I don't want to see them use more capital. I would rather just kind of take a gamble, and that is absolutely what this is on the lot. But that's what these late round picks are for, in my opinion. It's finding guys that you think you can do something with, and then figuring the what that something is out a little bit later. Just because it's just such a low risk pick. It doesn't matter that much if you don't hit on a seventh rounder.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This seventh round is, especially after we've already taken 10 picks, right? Like it's more than likely that this guy won't even make the team, perhaps. But it is a fun opportunity to kind of have, your own choice at who there is without other teams kind of coming at you or maybe, giving them more of a decision. Um, I think at this point I'm between two players. So the first player that hit me was Desmond Watson. I do already have a nose guy, but I mean a 460-pound nose tackle is just it's just fun.
And the
And he
Ravens
ran
have experience. I mean, certainly Michael Pierce wasn't that big, but he dealt kind of year in and year out.
yeah.
He dealt with, the issues of trying to get in and
Mm.
stay, get in shape and stay on the right weight. And so I think that's something they at least have some experience with.
Yeah, so I think, Desmond Watson, with watching him move like that, he's somebody who is intriguing at the least, right? He's somebody who you can look at and say, "Oh, that's fun. That was a fun last pick." But I think I'm actually going to go with a different player, and that is going to be Joshua Gray out of Oregon State, an interior offensive lineman who is, you know, definitely size-wise a guard, but is on the bigger side of it, and I think has some very good upside. I think that Oregon State was not a phenomenal team last year, but he was one of the bright spots in that interior line and one of the main reasons why they won any games at all. I think he really pulled his weight, all 300 pounds of himself at guard. Uh, and I think if there's any wiggle room to make the team at this late in the draft, it's probably going to be in the interior offensive line.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I think he's a little bit undersized to be a tackle. I would worry about his ability to set an anchor against some of these bigger NFL edge rushers, because he doesn't have the length. His length doesn't match his size or
Mhm.
his height, and so I think he ends up on the interior in the NFL. Having the experience he has at left tackle is a plus, both if you need it in a pinch and just in terms of his development. But yeah, I think this is a guy who ends up and could provide depth on the interior. Um, he good athleticism and foot skills. I don't don't see him as a long-term starter, but like we've been saying, this is a late seventh round pick. If you get a guy who is a solid backup for a couple of years out of a seventh round pick, that is actually a pretty good outcome. So
Right.
I'm
You
gonna go
won
ahead and
that.
take him a lot here. I think the Ravens could certainly try and work on his arm and maybe if you have a guy in the roster who can maybe be listed as a quarterback but play on special teams and maybe do some gadget work as well on offense. That's also a little tricky way to get around some of the roster requirements and have an emergency third guy active as well. There's a lot of upside to that, and like I said, at the end of the seventh round, that's kind of what you're looking for. So I'm gonna go ahead and add him to my draft. I'm gonna go over my list of picks here real quick. Starting with my first round pick, James Pierce Jr. This has been a player who has been long mocked to the Ravens. Like I said, there are questions about the want to of is the Ravens typically look for guys who football, they eat, breathe, sleep. Football is their number one thing. And so, that is the one question about Pierce. Ozzy Trapilo, a pick that PFF did not like at all. To me, that is a guy that you're looking maybe to flip him into guard, but if you have a rookie who can come in and be a swing tackle right away, which is something that this team just does not have right now. They don't have a backup offensive tackle, making that a pretty significant need. They might sign a guy like George Fant, and that's great, but Fant's also been injured a lot. A lot of the older tackles that are available in free agency, is still available, have been injured a lot in their careers. So I don't think it's bad to go after, a guy like Trapilo here. Like I said, I really would have preferred Ariante Ersary, who went right before the Ravens pick in this mock. Andrew Makuba, who I guess if you flip these, PFF might like it more, who is kind of bookmarked as my day two safety if the Ravens don't get Watts or Malachi Starks, like I said. Um, Cameron Jackson, there's your nose. I think he'll come in and contribute right away as a nose tackle. They can work on trying to develop his pass rush moves, but just bodies and depth along the interior line is a serious need for them. Kobe King, who you talked about a little bit as well, is just a downhill, aggressive run defender. Good, will be good on special teams. Like I said, profiles kind of like Malik Harrison in terms of his ability to maybe flip outside and play as an edge run defender. I don't think he'll ever be an edge rusher, but I think he could be an outside backer in run defense. Chao Manognai, who I think fits what the Ravens are looking for in terms of attitude, mentality, those intangibles about how he plays offense. It's just his athletic limitations are going to be a pretty hard ceiling for him. But the upside, like I said, of adding a running back who has pass catching upside, is really important to me in this Lamar Jackson offense because he opens up so much more room for rushers and can help kind of cover ups for some of the deficiencies in a runner. But he's not able to do that as much. To help them as pass catchers. So that's why I like that pick. Dylan Fairchild, I would love this on day three. Just a very experienced starting guard, who was a member of a very good Georgia offensive line. I would be surprised if he was available this late. But I think that he's going to keep getting better in the NFL. He is on the younger side. I think he's barely 22, if he's not quite 22 yet. And the Ravens will really try and develop him in the long term. Again, a late sixth round pick. To me, that's a guy who could be starting at guard by the end of his rookie contract. Justin Wally, like I said, a little bit of a guy who might project better on the inside, but that to me is a place where the Ravens need depth on the inside as well as the outside. Um, Jimmy Horn Jr., 5'8". That's going to be the big knock. And I get that, but as a returner, I'm about it, and potentially as a gadget guy on offense later on, kind of like what I was saying with Edge before, is that, the first three guys in this receiver room are set, and I'd love to see Wallace and Walker compete for that wide receiver four role, which means there really isn't room on the roster to add a premium receiver. Jared Harrison Hunt, I was saying this the whole draft. I really wanted to add a second defensive lineman that had a little more pass rushing upside. I think Harrison Hunt has that with his explosiveness. A lot of development to do to keep him in the NFL as a disciplined run defender. But I think that's a fine stab to take on day two. And like I said, even more important late on day three, I mean, to take a stab on an athlete like Tommy Lott, a really hard worker, a guy whose coaches rave about him, has a lot of those things that the Ravens love. It's just not really clear what he's going to do in the NFL. But I think the upside to him that I'm really interested in is if the Ravens are able to list him as a quarterback on their roster, he can be the emergency quarterback that is active on game days, the emergency third quarterback, but he can also fill other roles potentially on special teams as a returner. I think he was training as a receiver and a returner before the draft in the recent months. That's how he's been kind of advertising himself to teams. And so having a guy like that to kind of manipulate the roster numbers would be a very kind of tricky Ravensy move that I could see them trying to pull off. Zach, do you want to go ahead and run through your draft here?
Yeah, so you want to list who I who I took, and
Yeah,
then
so
I'll
your
talk to
first
you about them
pick
real
was
quick.
safety Xavier Watts. Second pick was CJ West, and third pick was Kobe Bryant. So I'll just list them like three at a time. You can talk about them.
All right, so pick one, Xavier Watts. I am just a huge fan of his versatility and his, sorry, not his versatility, but his intelligence and his instincts and his ability to jump on the ball, know where to be at the right time, and just he plays with instincts, and his instincts are always right. He ran a 4.56 40, which isn't the fastest, but you go watch him play and tell me he runs a 4.56 40. He is he seems like a football player and somebody who I think would work really well in the Ravens. I think it's a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a reach to take him 27th overall. Um, but he won't be there in the second round, and I think maybe he could even be one of those guys who we trade back our pick a couple picks to get a better value for him.
Yeah, I
Pick
think I'd be
two,
more on board with that.
yeah, pick two, CJ West. Um, he's just again like another intense football player who I think does a really good job of disrupting plays from the inside. I think that uh he can do a lot of what, Michael Pierce did from a smaller body and is really good at penetrating the interior. I mean, like I said, he's one of those guys who was at a small school, got to a bigger school, and is now, continuing to shoot up boards the more people see him, the more people get to know him. Um,
Third
my
pick was Kobe Bryant.
my third pick, Kobe Bryant. Again, just another guy who I think had just the reason why he's not much higher is because he didn't take the jump that a lot of people expected him to. But again, I think that was more of a result of Kansas football, not necessarily Kobe Bryant football. I think that he is a very talented player and can do a lot of the things that all these top guys can do. And I think because he's so young, he's still just as malleable and just as able to be uh, one of those guys who we, end up using pretty consistently, um, especially if, some of our other guys don't pan out as well.
Next two were Jack Kaiser and Ty Felton.
Jack Kaiser, I've been saying he's your favorite linebacker's favorite linebacker. He's a guy who plays football like a dog. Like he has all the tools, he has all the ability. Plus, he's also, a very like cerebral player in the fact that he can read defenses, he knows where the ball's going to go, he can predict plays, and I think next to Roquan Smith, he's going to be an absolutely insane player. Who's the next one?
Ty Felton.
Ty Felton. Like you said, Ty Felton isn't as maybe built as we would like him to be, but Ty Felton is still a very big wide receiver who's good at high pointing the ball. And look, he led the Big Ten in wide receiving yards for a reason, with frankly not super amazing quarterback in Billy Edwards. I think that making him, like he will draw coverage once he gets himself into into NFL form. And I think even if, maybe he never even finds himself as a true wide receiver, he will still be, his big frame and ability and quick step will definitely allow him to be an asset on special teams.
After that, you had Ja Joyner.
Ja Joyner, just a guy who maybe wasn't on my radar as much in the beginning, but somebody who I really think can just impact the game and be malleable to our needs. Um, Seeing, where we get him versus like how he will fit in. And like you said, doesn't really move people around the depth chart as much as maybe somebody a little higher picked would do.
After that, you had Ollie Gordon, another guy like big body back.
Yeah, like somebody who could probably learn a lot from, especially the longevity aspect of Derrick Henry, and would add a lot to our ability um, to run the ball. I mean, he catches the ball really well out of the backfield. He was the Doak Walker Award winner just 2 years ago. And I think if he was able to replicate that season a little better last year, he would have been a top 3 round pick. Ollie Gordon is somebody who I think is getting slept on because he didn't, have another game-breaking season, but has clearly shown that ability.
After Gordon, you had Ty Robinson, another guy that I have marked on my board.
Yeah, so Ty Robinson, I liked him a few rounds earlier, but he just stuck around. He wasn't actually someone I was intending on picking, but as far as a nose tackle go, especially pairing him up with Travis Jones and C.J. West now, you got a lot of talent right in the middle there, and really taking him where he is with the people around him. There's not a lot of pressure for him really to perform the same way that we would be expecting some of maybe some higher picks to be, or if we had chosen him higher. So I think that especially for the value that we took him at, that is that it's a very good pick there.
After that, you had Za Frazier, cornerback out of UTSA.
Yeah, so not somebody that as many people are talking about, but I mean he's got a lot of those physical attributes that you really like. And at this point in the draft, when you're taking him, you're looking for a lot of those physical attributes that you can mold into better players until you fit your scheme. And I think he will be very good at that at this next level.
And you had Efton Chisholm after that.
Afton Chisholm, undersized, not the guy who is not a wide receiver who you're taking early, but I really like his scrappiness, his ability to put himself out there, kind of like with your Montana State quarterback, just very hard working guy. And look, that game uh, that I went with him on, his first that I watched him on just kind of randomly this year. He had such a great first step. He runs his routes so clean, and he finds so much open space. In a way that you would expect almost like a veteran wide receiver to do.
And after that, you had Efton Chisholm.
That's who I just talked about.
Oh, I'm sorry. And who I forget who your last pick was actually.
Joshua Gray
Right.
from Oregon State. Yeah, just the same thing with him as far as, picking this late, right? Like a guy who definitely would get invited to camps, a guy who definitely could find himself on a roster, and somebody who, especially with guard relatively uncertain in Baltimore, somebody who could definitely wiggle his way into some, real reps, especially come the preseason. He was a very bright spot on a very not great team last year in Oregon State, but did a real good job when his number was called upon. And I think, his projection of just over a sixth grade, where he could be, a potential, perennial backup, maybe even get some real starting time, is going to be, uh, he's going to be a valuable asset to this team, assuming he makes it.
All right, Zach. Well, I like both of these classes. I really think your expertise about college football and knowing kind of the ins and outs of all these players and their where they've been and what they've done really what they've done really helps. I think a lot of times people like myself who are looking more at the NFL level and then really turn their attention to college have a tendency to get caught up in a couple things. One is the hype and the ebb and flow of the pre-draft process, and another I think is just that recency bias extending to the 2024 season and not looking at seasons before and trying to understand, well, if this guy took a step back, why was that, and things like that. So I really appreciate all the context that you bring to today's episode. Thanks so much for joining me one more time. Why don't you tell people where they can find your work?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. You can find me at the A to Z Poll podcast on YouTube and TikTok. YouTube, we post some podcasts generally breaking down the teams. The A to Z Poll does their own top 25 each week during the season, and we'll do stuff about current things happening. We'll go over this second spring window, transfer window, and currently on TikTok, we're doing a whole series going over all 136 FBS teams so you can be prepared for the 2025 season.
Yeah, Zach's content is how I keep up with college football. I really appreciate you joining me here today. I really love that jersey collection behind you.
Thank
I'm
you.
looking forward to the draft next week. Everyone who listened, thank you for tuning in. We're hoping to do maybe one or two more of these mock draft duels before things roll out on Thursday night. And then I think one thing that we're going to do after the Ravens draft finish is go through what happened in real life in the draft and go through each pick and decide what we would have done. So keep an eye out for that podcast after the draft as well. Thanks so much for listening and be sure to tune in next time.